Hello, all, and welcome to Refresh. This is a time for us to reflect, reset, and recharge. What do you think about that for all of our longtime viewers? Thought I would add that to this is a time for us to connect, be inspired, to learn something, and ultimately feel grateful for this time we took for ourselves and to be together. Social connectivity, I have to tell you, is one of the leading contributors to healthier and longer lives. And I'm saying that in front of one of the experts of the world. I, like so many of us, want to live longer and better lives, as we have the privilege of speaking about that today. From someone who continues to add supplements, how many of you are doing that, to our daily wellness routine every day, I'm intrigued by the breakthroughs in genetics, biotechnology, personalized medicine, and that all of this is enabling us to live longer and healthier lives. We're excited by the idea that aging can be slowed or reversed. A little Benjamin Button here, not just endured. I read a great note on this, and I guess I know it's out there in the zeitgeist, but the idea of us living, what do we say? We're focusing on health span, not lifespan. So, from the
Right.
fountain of youth to mythology and religion, humans have always longed to extend life. Now that it seems scientifically viable, this interest is even more intense and more practical. Hence, we see what Dr. Atias, his book, right, Outlive, is
hmm
like on the top five bestsellers for months and months and months and months. So today we are thrilled to welcome, hello, Dr. Pamila Brar, the medical director of the longevity program at Mayo Clinic's pioneering longevity center in Jacksonville. She's got an amazing background in science and research. And today, listen, how fortunate for us to be able to ask direct questions about something that impacts us all every single day. So where do we start? There's so much excitement about you and your work.
Thank you so much, Donna. I'm so happy to be with you and all the people on our call today. So thank you so much for having me. Um, yes, so I've been here in Jacksonville for about 4 months, and have been so fortunate to have come from a background in this new, exciting world of longevity. I spent 10 years at a startup in San Diego called Human Longevity, and got some wonderful, I think, very innovative experience as one of the first movers in the space of how to actually create sort of evidence informed longevity medicine, right? So there's a lot of snake oil out there. We all want to live longer and healthy, but how do we accomplish that through means that are actually responsible and help us accomplish not just, as you said, longer lifespan, right? But longer health span. So you queued it up just perfectly, Donna. So I'm going to show. I want it. This is all about the conversation, but I wanted to show one slide because I think it's just such a good, if that's okay.
So,
Lifespan, as we know, is the number of years we're alive, right? So that's no surprise. And then the new term that we all talk about in this field is health span. So that's the length of time that you're healthy, not just alive. So this little diagram I think shows it well. So normal aging, your health span goes on, and then unfortunately often at the end of life, for up to sometimes 10, 15 years, we just aren't living a high quality life. So one of the primary overarching missions of longevity medicine is to extend the time so that not only are we living longer, but we're spending more of that time in excellent health, right? And so that's really what it's all about.
right, right, right.
So and that's really the focus of the work that I've done with the team previously at Human Longevity. And now I'm so incredibly fortunate to be able to bring that experience to the new program that we're building here at Mayo Jacksonville.
Wow, it's got to be like totally oversubscribed already. I can't think of a subject that is more global in scope, right? There's no political divide about this one. Everybody wants this. It doesn't matter who you are. I'm just curious, in your early days of research on this, what was the breakthrough moment? Was there one? Were there many? Why do we think that we can now create this healthier lifespan?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there have been many, many moments, along the way, way before, for example, we started even our efforts 10 years ago. So, as you and I were just chatting briefly earlier, I think one of the biggest advancements that came along in this field was in the late 1990s when scientists both in the private sector and in the government basically figured out how to read the human genetic code, because that within that code are so many important discoveries about not only what we might be genetically predisposed to, but also how are we as individuals unique, right? Because those understanding those unique tendencies helps us understand what we as an individual might be predisposed to, and of course our families, and then also what interventions might work better for us or ones that we should avoid. So that was, I think, a major moment in the world of what we call precision medicine, and then I think multiple ones have come since, but one for me personally, I felt a bit like an astronaut when we started, me and the team that I got the chance to work with, back in, 2015, and we started this mission at Human Longevity of trying to figure out what are the key pieces of the puzzle that might help us predict what someone's at risk for, and how do we manipulate some of those bits of information to help extend someone's lifespan and their health span, right? So, for example, another huge advancement in my belief system is the use of technologies like whole body MRI imaging. So, if done responsibly, which I think is the key to all of these things, right? You need to have somebody's involvement that knows how to interpret the results and helps you understand and translate why it matters and what not to get panicky about, right? So when you start sequencing someone's whole genetic code and you start, scanning someone's entire body, you're going to find things, right? And so how do you make sense of it?
Mhm.
And so I think, you know, y- the and then leading up to the next topic, which is I think connecting all these dots of using genetics plus imaging to then come up with risk prediction, right? Like using AI to sort of say, okay, where do these things intersect? So if you have this genetic predisposition and these things on your imaging results, what does that mean? And how do we apply AI to help us make predictions, and help individualize those recommendations back to each of us, right? So that because we all know we need to sleep better, we need to eat better, we need to move and all the things, but there's a lot more nuance to what might work better for you versus your husband or, your best friend or what have you. And so I think those are some of the things that from my perspective as a doctor practicing in this space have been huge advancements, right? And then not to even mention the wearables, right? Like so things like continuous glucose monitors and Apple Watch and there's so many, it goes on and we haven't even gotten into the research thing, based tools. So that's I think those are a few of the things that stand out to me as being major advancements in this space.
Okay, there's so much to bite off here, and I just want to encourage all of our refresh guests. Feel free to ask questions. I mean,
Please.
everyone is so. I'm not even seeing any of the. Oh wait, here's chat. Okay, here we go. There's Lewis. Um, but there's this guy. I can't remember his name. I read an article about him, probably in the Times. Who's he's committed to living the longest he can. And
Mhm.
what that means is he can't eat after 11. He barely eats at all because he's done
Mhm.
all this research or reading about how food impacts our health and body. Are you
Right.
this guy? Now, I guess that could be tied to like quality of life and length of life. Like, who wants to live that life?
Right, right. I think you're probably, referring to the idea of intermittent fasting, right? The idea that sort of, when there's certain ways we can manipulate these, diet, exercise to make them, quite effective and hopefully to help extend or to perhaps arrest like things like metabolic syndrome and these things that we know can contribute to decline not only of life length but health span. So yeah, there's no question that you know rats that are underweight live longer, and we're not rats, humans aren't, just big rats. We're certainly different, but there is data that suggests that being on the underweight side, you know, actually is often associated with a longer lifespan. There's a few negatives of being underweight, and we certainly don't promote being underweight, but there's things like bone loss, if you're weighing less than you ideally should, right? And you don't have reserve. So if something does happen, if you heaven forbid have pneumonia or what have you, so it's all about finding a sweet spot, right? And I think everybody's looking for that kind of fountain of youth. I mean, it's natural, especially if you have a great life. If you have a great life quality, why not want to lengthen it, right? So I think that, yeah, I've definitely heard of multiple, means of people doing things that seem pretty extreme. I mean, I don't know about you, but I love food. So I think the likelihood that I'm gonna not eat for like most of the day is like, it's like, who wants to live like that, as you point out. So yeah, I think we like to use evidence to make recommendations, but we also like to, I'm believe very much in the quality of one's life, and that's where we're finding that honestly, out of all the interventions, as you alluded to earlier, being social is one that is showing up more and more as being predictive. People that have these very, I would say, robust and multi-layered, multi-generational networks of people, whether it be immediate family or a community that, or a church group or whatever it might be, those folks tend to have a longer health span, not just a longer lifespan. So there's a lot to be sort of, I think, unpacked in that space, but it's exciting to see that data starting to really be shown to be true, because outcomes in this space are hard, right? Because how do you prove that an intervention works?
Right.
It's going to take a period of time, right? So some of these things, are we're still catching up to where we're still learning. Some of these trials that have been going on for years and years are still not concluded. So yeah, but that's one that I think is fantastic. And so starving yourself, I'm not as into, but definitely, I'll sign me up for friends and and spending time with people that you love. I think that's a really great way to extend one's health span.
Oh, well, we're good. We're glad to know that because that's really what Generation W is all about, is bringing people together.
Right.
Today we everybody's talking about AI. AI is only as good as the data you can amass or aggregate. It could be big
Exactly.
data or small data. So my question is, how do you guys access this AI data that will help us understand trends and possibilities?
hmm Yeah, absolutely. So one example from this space of longevity is, we all want to know how to put things into context. So, for example, let's say you have genetic testing and you learn that, you have an increased risk of Alzheimer's. That can be complex and hard information to learn, right? And it's, particularly if you happen to also have a family member, a parent that had that condition, right? So, I mean, that can be a very terrifying bit of information. So, how do we then put it? What do we do with it? How do we put it into context? So, what we found in my prior experience, is that if you happen to have an increased genetic risk and you look at how those folks do over time, there's some of those people that unfortunately will progress to develop Alzheimer's in this case example, and others that for whatever reason, despite their genetic risk, don't, right? And so how do we discern, how do we make heads or tails of that, right? And so that's an example of, now if you then use brain imaging, right, and you measure the size of the memory lobe that's also known as the hippocampus. So let's say that somebody with a higher genetic risk happens to have a very healthy looking hippocampus, and then you're watching it over time. Maybe you do a brain MRI once a year. Well, then we can use AI to help us say, okay, maybe it is so that this person, while they happen to have this genetic risk, they happen to have a very healthy looking brain and their cognitive testing looks great. So then you could start to put all these data sets together and put and create models that help us predict which people might go on to progress and which people we can hopefully help stave it off. So a lot of, at least in the longevity space, it's all about combining these different, what we call biomarkers. So genetic testing is one, imaging is another. Now there's blood tests that help us measure some of the proteins that might be elevated in the blood as a result of Alzheimer's. And so if you can use that modeling early before someone actually manifests any issues, and then potentially say, okay, this individual, based on what we know from these risk predictors, might be at higher risk for progressing. And then these are the things we can do about it, right? We used to think there was nothing we could do, and that has been, largely dispelled. There are, newer treatments that are coming out. There are trials, and then there's lifestyle can account for a substantial portion of those folks that go on to progress to actual cognitive issues versus the ones that don't. So it's all about helping us translate what to do with these different bits of data, right? Because in this space, our goal is not to scare anyone. We just want to, just like with our finances, right? Like you're not going to just not look at a spreadsheet or not look at your statements that come back, even when you know the stock market might be a mess, right? I mean, that's one approach, but most of us know that's probably not going to work in the long run. So the same is true with, to some degree, I think when you go on this journey of sometimes learning about some of this data, we all take a deep breath and say, God, what if I find something out that's
Yeah.
scary? That's what I consider that to be my biggest responsibility as a doctor in this space, is to help put all the information into context, right? And to say like, okay, so let's put it all into let's use our experience and let's use all the data that we have to sort of give you a real sort of sense of what to do with this information, right? And so, um, it's a new science. We're learning more every day and every year. But I really believe that there's a lot more to good practice than just treating disease once it shows up. It's kind of like an iceberg, right? Like we know that iceberg, you might just be seeing the tip of the iceberg, but how do we get down so to the foundation to really help prevent things from progressing?
Yeah, no, and you mentioned fear. That's a great, I think, thing to call out because as you're sitting here, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I was fortunate many, 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 many years ago. So when this is not popular at all, my
Hmm.
company that I worked for actually had a relationship with a brand new imaging center. Like that was brand new technology.
Yeah.
All of the executives at the company were given a free full body image.
Hmm.
And
Great.
and so it's exciting, it's interesting, but it's also scary. So they find a little something. Well, do you follow that something? Is that something something, right? So as you mentioned earlier, all these things contribute to our ability to learn more, but also could take us down other rabbit holes. Not a reason not to do it, but there
Sure.
are, right? There are things. Let me just say, refresh, refresh, refresh. Welcome everyone to Refresh. A great day today because we are here with Dr. Pamela Brar. She happens to be, yes, the medical director of the longevity program at Mayo Clinic's Pioneering Longevity Center based in Florida, Jacksonville, Florida. So, wow, we feel so lucky to have that. We have a bunch of questions.
Great.
I answered this one for you, and then I'd like you to tell us a little bit about your story because that is so fascinating as well.
Oh, thank you.
Um, all right. Sorry, Kasha, but I'm going to go with Mary's question. How does someone go through the diligence of finding programs like this, credentials? Like what's needed to get into the program, referral? In other words, could we just make Admiral Jackson an appointment right now?
So
Well,
funny.
great, great question.
Yeah. So, if I'm just making sure I'm understanding the question correctly, how does one find and vet a program like a longevity program?
Right. And then how do you, what do you need to get into the program?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So, I would say, luckily this space is advanced quite a bit in the last 10 to 15 years. So, most of the programs are of the longevity programs are private programs that are you might find, a lot of it's word of mouth, but some examples of some of the larger programs have been around for a little bit longer, including the company I came from, Human Longevity, which still exists and is doing great out in San Diego, with another center now in San Francisco. Another company that came along shortly after Human Longevity is a company called Fountain Life. Similar type of program, and they're based more out here on the East Coast. And again, these are private pay programs. No, they're not covered by insurance. And typically they are things that people find on their own that either they heard about through a podcast or a neighbor or a friend or a family member or what have you. So those do not require typically any, most of these private programs don't require any referral from a doctor. It basically, they're all self-pay. So, it's a matter of sort of looking into them, and it's the same type of thing that I would say for any doctor or clinic that you're looking to go to is that I tend to always recommend that you want to choose places where the physicians are board certified. I tend to look for groups where the physicians are, from reputable training centers, university-based settings, where'd your doctor go to med school, the doctors that are, part of these programs or residency, those sorts of things. So those are all important. And board certification, typically there's no board certification yet for longevity medicine. So most longevity doctors are I generally either internal medicine or family practice, but people like Peter Attia is a general surgeon, so it's not a perfect rule. So I think those are some, important things to consider. Also, there's not yet many academic centers that are in this space, which is part of why I left my beautiful city of San Diego to come to Jacksonville because Mayo Clinic is it's just such a phenomenal high quality, platform that I think is, well respected
Oh,
and
yeah.
values, right? Values
So, yeah,
research,
the support of science and research and
right?
all
And
that good stuff.
education,
Education,
and
absolutely.
education. So I think that I'm sure that some of the other major academic centers will start getting into this space. But it's interesting, place like Mayo Clinic and places like Cleveland Clinic often are more conventional by just by the nature of their it's a lot of the reason that they are so well respected is that you follow guidelines and so on and so but I think everyone's starting to understand and see that this is a this is something that is already longevity is a field that is starting to really blossom and if we can use evidence and apply that now that we've had groups that have been working on this for years now. So yeah, so I would say most of the programs, how do you get into these programs? Typically they are to some degree pay to play. They're if you decide you want to sign up for it. Many of them, range in cost from, anywhere from 10,000 to 60,000 a year for a membership. So depending on how extensive the testing might be. So, certainly my goal isn't to promote any one program, but just to make folks aware of, the space and
Right.
so if you're someone that likes data and knowledge and, wants to kind of not just do things that are insurance reimbursed, it might be something to look into.
So, I mean, that's a perfect segue because Kasha asked this question is, the majority of people will not be able to afford this.
Right.
Now, so do you think we'll get to the point where we will be covered by insurance? How do you see a broader mass availability to the majority of people in some
Mhm.
form or format?
Yeah, it's a bit, I wish I could look into the crystal ball and know how that goes because there's so many variables, right? Like even
Yeah,
the political environment can impact, how open insurance companies might be. Reimbursement often falls way behind, even, innovation is, right? That probably doesn't surprise anyone. So I would say there's in the case of whole body MRI, there's very few scenarios where that's currently covered. Um, in some cases of certain cancer syndromes or, certain genetic variants, it might be covered, but it's not common, frankly. So um there are companies that and centers, academic centers that are starting to offer whole body MRI and those might range in cost from somewhere around 2,500 to 7 or 8,000 for just a whole body MRI. I think one of the challenges with whole body MRI is there's not a lot of physicians that have a ton of experience interpreting the results of whole body MRI. So that can be a bit problematic because if you go and get a test done, then you don't want to be the one having to figure out, okay, now what do I do with all these results? And so it's a little bit of these are somewhat uncharted waters, which is what often leads people to a longevity program because it's where, you're going to actually have a physician or a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant help you translate some of that information.
right. So another question from Lewis is, how do you know? They're like health information has become somewhat, I don't know. It used to be your doctor said you do this, you do this. How do you know where to trust or how do you make informed choices? Right? It sounds like
Hmm.
everything that you're doing is coming from research, education,
Hmm.
science. You have a database, right? You have recommended and revealing studies that say, hey, here's what we're learning from this. And yet, how do you know
Mhm.
what to trust?
Yeah. That's a great question. I mean, I think it's not that, it's funny. I'm going to give you an analogy. I just, moved across the country to beautiful Jacksonville to Neptune Beach. How do you find, you know, all your people, your dentist? How do you know? Right. And so I think when it comes to the space of, just anything health related, I usually go back to those same basic principles of, asking people that you know and trust. If you know someone, I mean, that's literally how I've recreated my little network here in Neptune Beach is, I go to the person that I think is the smartest or the most trustworthy and the most, sort of reasonable, has sort of maybe a similar mindset to my own and ask, okay, who's your dentist? Who's your all? So I think that same kind of mental framework is something we can apply in a space like this that's so new, right? So I think there's no black and white answer. I think eventually, just like anything else, I would anticipate that this type of field of medicine is going to have a board certification. And again, that's not perfect either, right? You can always have some Yahoo that while they're board certified is still, on the fringe or what have you. But I think it's trusting your instinct. And I think, really asking a lot of questions, and trying to get a feel for how, I'm all about interviewing, people. I mean, I actually interviewed a couple dentists just because, um, in this scenario, I was halfway through a dental implant, right? So my dentist is in San Diego. I can't be flying back and forth. So I had to meet a few before I knew, what felt like the right fit for me.
Too bad. You should have called me. I could have helped you.
See, Donna, now I know.
I could have
Where
been
were
a
you?
connection
Where
there,
were you?
right? Tell us a little bit about your story because at a very, very young age, you seem destined for your destiny.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, so it's a great thank you for asking. I love people's stories, like the origin story, I think is really fun and fascinating to talk about. So thanks for asking about mine. So my parents are Indian immigrants from northern India, and they decided in the late 60s, in their late 20s, they decided to immigrate to the US. So my dad is a PhD economist, and he did his PhD at Oregon State, and picked peaches to, pay for living there. And my sister, who's 4 years my senior, had just been born. And then I was born in 1972. And so my parents both came from farming families in the Central Valley of California. So my parents spent a few years there, and then my dad got a teaching position in Louisiana. So we moved to my home, what I consider my home state of Louisiana. Go Tigers! And grew up, had a really fun upbringing. My mom stayed home with us, and it was kind of a funny thing because I felt like the only Indian people. It was really an interesting place to grow up, and people were friendly, and my parents were great. They're both educators. And encouraged my sister and I to, to pursue our dreams. And so I always knew I wanted to be a doctor, and was fortunate to end up going to LSU med school in New Orleans, and then moved out to California. We had a lot of family still in California, so was fortunate to land in San Diego at Scripps Clinic, and did my training there. And so I would say I was always a science kid. Absolutely loved science, and I loved solving problems and being able to help people. And
Did
so
you say how old you were when you started college?
Oh yeah. Well, so the public school system in my lovely state of Louisiana was horrible back then. It was like I think worse in the country. And so we were always in private schools. And unfortunately though, the economic environment at some point when I was probably 13 or 14 was terrible. So the private school I was going to unfortunately did not survive. And so I was around 14 and a half, and my parents said, honey, the school is unfortunately shutting down. And so what should we do? Because I was going to be entering high school soon. I think I was in my eighth grade year. And I just was thought to myself, well, what can I just go to college? I mean, because I don't know. I just didn't want to go. The local public school didn't have a great reputation. And I didn't really want to go to boarding school. So long story short, through a number of hoops, I was able to sort of skip over the usual high school experience. And so 15, I started college at my alma mater, Southeastern Louisiana, and where my dad taught school. So it was definitely a familiar campus to me. And yeah, it was really fantastic. And it was, I think it was a sort of an opportunity for me to see that if you kind of dream it, you can do it. And I just was eager to get on with the schools I had always gone to there growing up were you could sort of work at your own pace. And so I was fortunate to have teachers that were, really inspired me to sort of just do everything I could do and not limit myself based on my age or my grade. And so it all worked out. And, my parents were really forward thinking and encouraged us, sure, you could skip these years, but you gotta figure out how not to be a weirdo. So they encouraged us to get involved. My sister skipped her senior year and I skipped high school. And so yeah, so we got, I got very involved in at the time at my at our at our university and like multiple social groups. And I'm still very close friends with a few of my friends from that. So anyway, I think it what it did for me, I think, was just make me realize anything was possible. And again, if you dream it, you could do it. And I think while I wonder sometimes now that I have kids in their early 20s, I'm like, what in the world? Was that even a good idea? But I think it all worked out. So, and it made me realize, like, yeah, if you try hard and you have the right purpose and you want to help people, there's a lot of doors and kind people that will help you.
So listen, we can't, Sherry, do we have your top three longevity recommendations? I don't know if we have that. We can go through that now. I think everybody here wants to know how can we live longer?
Yeah, that's absolutely. It's a great question. So I'm a big believer. I mean, these are just my personal kind of anecdotes. I think I'm a big believer in you've got to measure things to be able to, tell if you're on track, just like we do with everything else, right? So I'm a big believer that data matters. And in this case, I think the data that I believe is the most impactful, along with someone to help you interpret it, are things like a whole genetic analysis, whole body MRI, the right blood work. So I think data is important, and not only data once, but remeasuring things to see how you're doing. Um, I think that sleep as a second sort of pearl of wisdom, I think sleep is getting so much more attention because we realize that's when we heal, that's when our brains clear out a lot of the chemical clutter that we accumulate from our crazy, busy, hectic lives. So I think optimizing our sleep and really looking at all the parts, things that go into that. And again, measuring our sleep, again, same concept that you got to measure it to be able to improve it.
What specifically are we measuring when we measure sleep?
Yeah, so I think it's everything from I mean, there's many tools and most of us probably have seen things like the Aura Ring as one example or the Apple Watch. So I think it's looking at everything from, I mean, this is a whole hour long discussion by itself, but it's everything from first of all, how many hours are you sleeping? To how much of that time is spent in deep sleep, which is REM and deep sleep when we think that's when a lot of the recovery of our brain goes on, and sort of the recycling and removing the toxins and so on. And so depth of sleep, length of sleep, and looking to see there's some things that can tip us off to someone being sleep deprived. So if you fall asleep super quickly, that usually means there's terms like sleep latency. So there's things that tell us or suggest when someone's not getting probably ideal levels of sleep. Or recognizing if you have a problem like sleep apnea, that's also really critical to being able to predict someone's, if you're a healthy sleeper or not. So I think using some of the commonly available wearables like the Aura Ring can be a good way to even remind ourselves to like try and get in bed by a certain time, try and wind down. So that there's a lot in the sleep area, but I think like anything, I think starting with measuring your sleep, whether it's a simple tool like the Aura Ring, which is available to anybody over, you can get on the website and see how to go about ordering that. So just being more aware of one's sleep and the things that go into it, is I think is important. And then I think, as far as how to like longevity pearls, I think movement is incredibly important. So getting some form of physical movement almost every day, if you can, most days of the week, I just think can never be underestimated. So I think those are three things that really are important. So finding out, what your risks are through some of these tools that we've discussed, measuring it and then remeasuring it. And again, some of that you can do on your own through some of the tools that are available, like the wearables. Some of it I would recommend doing under the oversight of a physician if you are able to, like the imaging and the genetics. Like I said, secondly, really looking at your sleep and thinking about what things you can do to improve your quality of sleep. And I think then, some of the other things that that we've discussed, like exercise and movement, and really trying to build that into your, longevity is a practice. It's not a one and done. Even if you go and get a whole body MRI and, hopefully, God willing, it looks great. Just a matter of continue. Remember, it's a practice. Longevity, to be able to live long and well, we know it requires us to each, participate, right? So, and then if I could have a fourth one, it's, the social part. I think I can't overestimate how important I think that really is to not just lifespan, but the health span.
Right. Yeah, this movement one always gets me. I feel some days I just can't get out of my chair, and yet I want to.
I know, I know, I know.
And so I've heard from my trainer and other people, right, that can't that sitting is the new smoking.
Right.
And I kind of understand it because as you get older, your body reacts differently to being immobile as opposed to when you're young and you could just jump up and go anywhere at any time, which is what I'm used to.
Hmm.
But my knees are talking to me now in ways they have.
I know, I know, I know. I hear you. But when it comes to, like, it's all about habits, right? Healthy habits and the practice, the daily practice. So let's say you're sedentary. Okay, let's say, like last year, I went through 6 months when I was basically sedentary, which was embarrassing, right? Because I'm like a longevity expert. But life sometimes gets in the way. So when you think about trying to get back into exercise, for example, there's a few things that we've learned from the habit data, and one is the most important thing that can predict somebody getting back into a healthy exercise routine when they've been sedentary for whatever reason, right, would be, one is the frequency. So if you can just every single day in a week just get, even it's literally if it's 10 minutes, right? So frequency is very, very important to habit building. And then the next one is probably intensity. So you, even if let's say you only do 10 minutes, if you could do it a little more intensely, like, kind of working up a sweat, that's really important. And then, closely in competition with intensity is duration. So the length of time that you exercise. So don't think about, like, most of us, okay, I'm going to exercise. I'm going to do it. I'm going to work out for an hour every day. Don't even do that to yourself. Start out with just doing something every day, then try and get a little more intense, and then try and increase the length of time that you're doing it, right? Would be one little sort of way to fool ourselves into getting back into some of the healthy, habits. I
Yeah.
think I saw a question pop up about
Yeah,
wearables.
we have time for one more question from Michelle. Do you have recommendations for, and I thought this is a good point, right? Apple Watches get costly, Oura rings are costly, and then you have the maintenance per month. So is there a source to find something that's more reasonably economic?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it's all about how we invest, our money, and that isn't a judgment thing. But I mean, I'll tell you something. I think that the Apple Watch is probably one of the most incredible advancements because it can, like, alert you to you're in an abnormal heart rhythm, like atrial fibrillation. It'll, even if you set it up, if so one of my best friends is an 80-year-old, most amazing woman I've ever met, besides my mom. My friend Ellie. So she was a superintendent in San Diego. She's the most wonderful humanitarian. So I'm her emergency contact. When she fell in her kitchen, she actually passed out. Her Apple Watch called me and said, Ellie is so the amount of layers of, like, incredible, like, sort of algorithms that are built into these devices is unreal. So I think that even though I agree that some of these devices are expensive, I think something like the Apple Watch, to look at, how many steps you're taking, it even has sleep apps that you can put on there. So as far as one, and I promise you, I'm not being endorsed, I'm not getting paid by Apple to say this, but I think that it's really worth, the investment in your own health to look at a wearable like that. It can really give you a ton of information. So if I were to say just one that I think, for a number of reasons, can give you a lot of bang for your buck, the Apple Watch. You don't have to get the ones with most bells and whistles, but I think that's a great one.
Yeah, no, that is really, really great. And I have mine on, but the idea of wearing it at night, I'm like, no, I need to take off my devices, but now you're making me think different. I want to thank you so much, Dr.
Thank
Barr,
you.
giving us a lot to think about and a lot of great nuggets. And this is the first time I actually type my notes. Usually I sit here and write them. And
No,
the ones I love this, the longevity pearls, right? Movement, sleep, data is important, not only getting the data, but remeasuring social connectivity. All these things are really important for us to live longer. We have to like invest in ourselves. We have to take the time, right? Like even
right.
taking this time around for a refresh, it's actually an investment in our well-being. So I want to thank everyone for joining us and remind you that we will be back next week, the 28th. We will be celebrating two phenomenal female trailblazers. It is Memorial Day weekend. And so
Amazing.
retired Colonel Aries Mentor will be with us. She made history as the commander at Maxwell Air Force Base. She has more than 25 years in uniform. She's been on the Generation W stage. She was mesmerizing. And Dr. Tahina Montoya, she talks about service. She brings a global perspective rooted in real world experience and a commitment to shaping policy that reflects the values of peace, inclusion, and national security. It's a good time to appreciate those who've laid down their lives for us. I always like to say, freedom is not free. Some people think that doesn't sound very positive. I think it's a realistic
Mm.
realization that there are people who truly believe and act on behalf of the greater good, and to celebrate them actually is also an investment in our collective well-being. Thank you again, Dr. Brar.
Love it.
See you all
Thank you
next
so
week.
much.
I'll see you down somewhere in Neptune Beach. I'll come.
Um,
Yeah.
I'll be there knocking on your door. Thank you all. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Take
Okay,
care,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you, Sherry Levin, and all the team at Generation W for this great refresh. And we'll see you again next Wednesday. Bye bye.